You understand, I've witnessed plenty of disasters over the years. I've worked in film for ages. I've observed projects collapse entirely. I've seen performers totally unravel during filming. I've watched filmmakers break down completely under intense stress. But what unfolded this evening, that official speech to the nation, was on another level. This wasn't merely a catastrophe. It was a catastrophe unfolding gradually as the drivers yelled at the riders and accused them of causing the accident. Seriously, how do I start dissecting this mess? You're meant to deliver a speech to the country when there's vital information for citizens, something grave, something demanding the respect of the executive chamber, the authority of the office supporting it. You're expected to remain composed, focused, statesmanlike. You're supposed to comfort folks, not terrify them outright. Yet what we witnessed was a fellow who appeared exhausted from sleepless nights, wandering through wild speculations, accusing others while avoiding self-blame, and essentially experiencing a visible emotional collapse on broadcast TV. And this is the individual tasked with guiding the global superpower. This is the person with access to atomic weapons. Honestly, listen, I've viewed numerous leaders deliver speeches to the nation, some effective, some poor, some unmemorable. But they shared a key element. They grasped the seriousness of the occasion. They realized that addressing from that position means communicating not only to allies or opponents. You're addressing the whole population. You're speaking to international partners. You're addressing posterity. But this evening, it seemed as if we were observing someone utterly detached from facts, clueless about his surroundings or his duties. It resembled viewing a person debating imaginary opponents while the planet tuned in. The entire event went awry right from the outset. It was evident in his gaze, that frantic expression like a trapped creature. He wasn't following a prompter as leaders typically do. He lacked even prepared remarks. He was improvising freely. And believe me, when you're the head of the nation speaking amid turmoil, freestyle isn't viable. In the initial moments, he veered off course, diving into confusing tangents. He began ranting about media fabrications against him, how hidden forces conspired to undermine him, how all were plotting his downfall. And I wondered, hold on, this should focus on the ongoing emergency. This ought to cover answers, guidance, what on earth is going on. But things deteriorated further. Oh, they spiraled badly since he proceeded to call out individuals. He targeted particular journalists, certain lawmakers, specific magistrates. He was airing grudges publicly, treating the official speech as his private social media feed. But it wasn't a feed. It was an address to the nation. The Globe observed, and he behaved as if throwing a fit in private. I kept recalling all the leaders from my era. Kennedy amid the missile standoff, solid and unwavering. Reagan following the shuttle tragedy, selecting precise phrases to aid national mourning. Obama post-school shooting, displaying true direction during profound sorrow. Even Bush, after the attacks, regardless of opinions on his decisions, he recognized the gravity. He knew what the populace required. But this was the antithesis of direction. This was a figure utterly unraveling, losing his hold on presidential essence. It showed in his posture, leaning aggressively, thrusting his digit toward the lens as if battling it. It echoed in his tone, rising and growing more frantic over time. This lacked statesmanship. This was deranged. And the most awful aspect, the truly dreadful element, was imagining those nearby, the aides, the counselors likely present. They weren't visible, but their anxiety was palpable. You sensed they recognized this as a calamity happening live, powerless to intervene. They stood there pondering, how can we halt this? How to conclude before escalation? But escalation occurred because then arrived the instant etched in memory, the point where he fully disintegrated. He began claiming national issues stemmed not from him. How all negatives resulted from adversaries, prior officials, press, shadowy elements, anyone but himself. And while uttering this, shifting blame everywhere, his speech faltered. Not from sentiment, not fervor, but fury, raw, unchecked fury. You noticed vessels in his throat swelling. You saw his complexion flushing deeper, and his gestures, his limbs flailed as if directing a furious symphony invisible to others. This wasn't a leader speaking to citizens. This was a man collapsing utterly on the grandest platform imaginable. And then, unbelievably, he began cutting himself off. He'd launch into one idea, then detour wildly, circle back, but by then he'd misplaced the initial thread. It resembled observing a battle against personal ideas unfolding instantly. I've dealt with enough talent to recognize fumbling dialogue, poor ad-libbing, fabricating on the spot. But this differed. This wasn't mere clumsy invention. This was someone appearing oblivious to his role. No awareness of the context, no comprehension of his burden. The prompting device existed. It was visible, yet ignored. Perhaps he couldn't decipher it, couldn't concentrate, or believed he outsmarted his writers. Thus, rather than a logical statement, something beneficial for the land, we receive this erratic monologue, leaping subjects like a chaotic game. He mentioned finances briefly, shifted to borders, then personal lawsuits, back to finances but another angle, then some plot about elections, then his mistreatment, back to borders, but now a fresh border angle. It drained energy to observe. I shudder thinking of enduring it as an insider. And the verifier's goodness, the verifiers feasted. Since he didn't merely wander, he invented. Figures that mismatched, assertions easily debunked, tales from delirious visions. Once he spouted crime data so inverted, so detached from truth that I burst into laughter, not for humor, but absurdity. But the truly alarming element wasn't the falsehoods. Officials deceive routinely. We expect it. The alarming part was his apparent faith in them. He wasn't merely deceiving the public. He deluded himself. And when the nation's head confuses truth with illusion, danger looms. It appeared in his stare, that rift from actuality, that gaze implying he viewed not reality but a twisted realm where faults belonged elsewhere, where he suffered rather than commanded. And simultaneously, during this spectacle, global figures observed. Partners and rivals alike beheld the U.S. leader shatter publicly. What crossed their minds? What filled dispatches home? I'll reveal their thoughts. They concluded America faced peril. They deemed the supposed global guardian incapable of navigating a basic talk. They saw chances to exploit our vulnerability, our disorder, our absence of reliable command. And that's the genuine sorrow, not merely enduring nearly half an hour of disjointed babble. It's that the planet witnessed, comrades, foes, all, and they perceived fragility. They observed turmoil. They saw a land with a commander who had fully surrendered authority. And know what followed the instant it concluded, the moment recording ceased: crisis management. Sheer desperate crisis management. Shortly after, his team issued clarifications, attempting to explain intended meaning, retracting extremes, reframing the fiasco logically. But you can't erase that echo. You can't retract global observation. I've faced scenarios where all fails, where endeavors crumble, where disaster strikes and the reaction mirrors, attempt repair, attempt reframe, persuade observers it wasn't catastrophic, but occasionally repair fails. Occasionally harm persists, leaving admission and improvement as paths, but not here. Rather than confessing error, recognizing severe malfunction, they intensified. They accused press for distorting words. They cited glitches unseen by others. They faulted all but the speaker, and that reveals the regime's operation. Success yields full praise. Failure always another's burden. Ignore that this was a countrywide talk, that he chose deviation, that he transformed solemnity into vendetta venting. Responses from his faction spoke volumes. Republicans who'd shielded him endlessly. Through controversy upon controversy, even they strained for defenses. Their peak was, he's fervent on topics. Fervent, that's the label. That wasn't fervor, that was collapse. But here's what truly infuriates me. What genuinely enrages about this affair. Genuine issues plague this land. Authentic hurdles demand authentic direction. Individuals suffer, households ache, groups fracture. And rather than tackling any, rather than leveraging this for unity proposals, genuine command, we endured nearly half an hour of victimhood and wild claims. That's not merely unleader-like. That's disloyalty to those relying on governance, all needing guides to guide. This wasn't concerning his pride or lawsuits or rivals. This should have centered on the nation. But with him, it invariably circles back to self. And the direst element, the utterly direst, is that loyalists will likely justify it. They'll claim he spoke truth, battled for them, that coverage aims to tarnish. They'll twist this calamity into evidence of his oppression, his valor in voicing opinions. But others, those valuing skill and honor and fundamental expertise, we perceived otherwise. We saw a figure who fully relinquished command, not merely personally, but over circumstances, his team, his duties as head, and that ought to alarm all, beyond affiliations. Since if the U.S. head can't manage speech stress, how will he cope with actual peril? How will he respond to assaults or calamities or atomic dangers? How will he stay serene, firm, soothing, rather than enraged and suspicious and fully erratic? The response is he won't. He'll crumble as tonight, and that endangers everyone, that jeopardizes our land, that threatens our system. So this wasn't merely poor oratory. This wasn't a mere awkward incident to chuckle over and dismiss. This was an alert. This previewed outcomes when unfit individuals gain roles. This recalled that language counts, direction counts, ability counts, and crucially, this recalled we can't merely wish for improvement. We can't presume it'll resolve somehow, because tonight demonstrated it won't. Tonight showed we're isolated, unable to rely on the authority figure for duty. Thus, it's our responsibility. It's every citizen who cherishes this nation, who trusts in potential undercapable guides. We must improve. We must insist on improvement because without, if we normalize this, we share blame for consequences.